If it goes right, it's a slice. If it goes left, it's a hook. If it goes straight, it's a miracle. This is Out of Bounds. If it's happening in the world of golf, we're talking about it. Coverage, debate, discussion, pro golf and local golf. Let's do it. This is Out of Bounds. And here are your hosts, Nate Sharman and Josh Durso.
All right, welcome to another edition of the Out of Bounds podcast. Josh Durso and Nate Sharman here taking team golf on the PGA Tour, LIV Golf in Australia, and we're also going to be talking about the Mexico Open this weekend. We had the Zurich, which, Nate, was a good event. I would call it a success. We like seeing some different formats, and of course, we had a first-time winner.
Yeah, Nick Hardy and Davis Riley get the win. They got the 30 under on the event, so a low-scoring event for sure, of course, like we predicted. And yeah, team golf for sure is fun to watch. It's just something different on Sunday, and you're watching these guys play alternate shot, which is challenging to say the least. You know, best ball is really easy just to play your own ball, but alternate shot requires a lot more strategy and thinking where you're going to leave your partner, and the guilt factor too, right? If you hit a bad shot. So I think alternate shot is something that can be successful on the PGA Tour. I think they need to do something a little bit different with the Zurich, because it's cool that we have some of these no-name guys, you know, first-time PGA Tour winners like Nick Hardy and Davis Riley. Well, Davis Riley is a very much an up-and-comer on the PGA Tour. But I think if you figure out a way where maybe make it elevated or kick it a little bit more money into the purse, you're going to attract more guys in that top 10. You had some guys in the top 10 of the world golf rankings, but I think if you able to kind of kick up that purse and more better place it on the schedule, I think you could attract some bigger names and get some more people watching.
Yeah, it's a tough time, right? Like you're coming off the RBC, you've got the Masters 2 weeks ago. I think it's a big ask.
Creeping up. You got the Wells Fargo next week, which is an elevated event, so it's just tough.
Yeah, it's not ideal. I'm with you on seeing some different formats. We talked about that a lot last week, of course. But you know what? I would like to see. I think the thing that I was feeling Sunday afternoon was this event is awesome, one, but two, I'd like to see an elevated version of it, which goes back to the point that I made, last week and after the match play. The PGA Tour should embrace these different events and put more of them on the schedule. Don't just stick with what you have, like doing this once a year, doing match play once a year. When your aim is to really kind of revolutionize professional golf, especially to improve the watching experience, it seems like more events like this is just the most common sense play ever. Right?
Yeah, and I just hope they find a way to get match play on the PGA Tour next season, because we have the match play Dell match play is going away after this season. Yeah. So we talked about the Tour Championship idea, but they've got to have a couple more ideas cooked up, because I know we're going back into the match play discussion, but just trying to find a way to get that on the tour next year along with the Zurich could be a good idea, because just like I said, just being different and being able to watch something a little bit different and consume that. And I also think just the alternate shot in best ball is more relatable, right? Well, that's a format that the common golfer can play and does play, that oftentimes. So I think that can be a really good avenue for the PGA Tour, but even match play more so than like the Zurich. You got to find a way to get that back on the tour, because that's fun to watch.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about LIV Golf's trajectory here after a really successful weekend. But when you've got LIV Golf doing different things, kind of pushing the limits of what is conventional professional golf, if you're the PGA Tour, you have to think outside the box. And I don't know how, match play and team golf isn't a part of that equation. I just don't.
Agreed.
But talking about LIV, Australia, a success. What stood out to you as you watched a little bit of golf this past weekend on tape delay?
Yeah, I didn't watch a ton on tape delay. I was kind of following along on social media and stuff, but it looked like you said a great success. You have Taylor Gooch winning the individual, Fort Aces win yet another team event, which is put that to the wayside. It's not extremely important, but I thought this was the most successful LIV event by far in their whole being. 12 events so far that they've had in their career, and you take a look at some of the social from videos and stuff. You have a good amount of fans there. They're pretty loud and positive too, of course. And I think this is a really good spot for LIV because this is kind of what they seem to narrow their focus on, right? In the last couple months, they want to be, their motto is golf, but louder, right? They don't want to be this polished golf tournament where you guys wear pants and they wear button-up shirts and they go play and try to play the best that they can. No, they're going to play music in the background. They're going to wear shorts. They're going to do all these different things, throw beers on the holes like they did at the watering hole at LIV Australia. So I think it was a real successful event for LIV in that regard. They had some guys play well too, which is a good thing too as well. So I just thought it was kind of fun and refreshing to see, LIV kind of lean into that golf but louder motto that they've been kind of running with.
I agree. Initially, there were some things that I saw on social media that made it feel a little forced. But at the end of the day, it looks like it was a successful weekend. Listening to the players, I know, take it with a grain of salt because they've got to say good things. It's in their contract about LIV. But, you had some players saying that it felt a bit like a major. Clearly, this was, from the players' perspective, the best environment LIV has produced to date.
Definitely.
So I guess my curiosity is, can they get that to translate into U.S. events where they can ultimately capitalize on the business side of this a little more with better TV and more eyeballs and ultimately more money down the road? Because that's really what a lot of it comes down to. But
right, that's a tough question, I think. Yeah.
Fun to see. Australia, you threw the question out there, is Australia an untapped market, and should the PGA Tour work to get some kind of stop there? What do you think? What's your take on that?
I think it's absolutely an untapped market. You don't see very often where the PGA Tour plays there. They do have an Australian tour over there. It's a pretty condensed tour. I don't even know how many events it is. I think it's less than 10. And they don't play for a lot of money. I think only 2 events play for over $1 million. So you had Taylor Gooch, who won the LIV Golf event in Australia, win $4 million. So he wins more than any of those events even come close to, right? So I think, you have golf kind of booming all across the world, right? In these last couple of years, especially. Australia has always been somewhere that likes golf. You have a lot of good players out of Australia. Now, a lot of them are on the LIV Tour, which is good for them, right? That they're kind of leaning into this Australia thing, especially behind Cameron Smith and his Australian-based team, right? You can kind of show that these guys are from your country and they know what to do in terms of representing your country and doing it well. So I really need to credit LIV Golf and Greg Norman for kind of leaning into that and knowing that, if they go to Australia, A, place the PGA Tour hasn't really been lately, and B, a place with golf-crazed fans, right, that are going to come out and support and be loud and kind of lean into your brand. So I really need to credit them in terms of getting there before the PGA Tour does and really kind of untapping that market where you have just fans that are willing to go and support and be loud.
Yeah, and actually, I agree. I don't think it's a good idea for the PGA Tour, though. And it's mostly just based on what the PGA Tour's business model is. Like, they're a $1.5 billion business. Largest share of that revenue, around $660 million of it, is coming from tournaments. And that's, mostly comprised of sponsorships and ticket sales. So the first problem in Australia compared to an American stop is that you're not going to sell as many tickets. And you're going to lose money there. But
it was their biggest, most well-attended event that they've had. You take a look at some of the U.S. events, they don't have a ton of people there. Australia for sure had more for LIV anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference between like LIV and PGA Tour, and that's why I don't think it's a good idea for the PGA Tour to really bother with it right now. And the other component of it is like, tape delay golf is so hard to sell on American television, and given that is such a revenue driver for the PGA Tour, I don't think it can work. Now, if it's your long play, if you're saying, 5-10 years from now, when, consumption habits are different and maybe TV isn't number one anymore, maybe it will have warranted going to Australia. But again, there are a lot of these, I call them like core problems with golf that go all the way back to the beginning of the LIV PGA Tour debate. You're not bringing new fans into the fold. You're just kind of dividing the existing consumers of golf up. And the growth that the game has seen over the last 3 or 4 years since the pandemic, I don't think has had a chance to really take hold. And I don't think the people who have picked up golf in 2020 or 2021 or 2022 have really converted into sitting and watching golf all weekend. Might in the future, but I think that's kind of from the business side, I don't think it's a good decision for the PGA Tour. And I understand why they, stick with what's tried and true. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do some interesting things with those events to make them more unique and make them stand out.
Right.
But, another question about LIV that kind of falls into the same basket is LIV starting to gain some juice here? Are they starting to gain some traction?
I think so, as much as they can gain, right? I think, in my opinion, I was kind of thinking about this yesterday. LIV started where they wanted to become the main professional golf tour, right? They wanted to kind of kick the PGA Tour out and become the spot that the best golfers in the world go to. Well, that's not really a reality, right? You have most or almost all at this point, some of the better players playing on the PGA Tour. So it's going to be tough to get guys like Rory McIlroy, Jon Rahm to come to your golf tours. So I think LIV has kind of realized that they're never going to kick the PGA Tour out entirely. So they're kind of leaning into this whole golf but louder thing, right? This whole thing that I talked about, where they're the tour where they can go to a place like Australia and they're going to get people to come out and people to enjoy it. So I think by playing well in the Masters, they validated some of their guys. These guys can still play golf, that's for sure. You have Koepka, who almost won the event, Mickelson, top 5, Reed, top 5. So they have guys that can play golf. You haven't seen people on social media saying, oh, these guys can't play, they're done. In the last couple of weeks since the Masters, that's gone down noticeably. I haven't seen many people say that they can't play, because how can you say that after they play that well in the Masters? So I think by using some of those different steam points, they can kind of really upstart their league even more. And I think they can kind of carve out a niche role if they do it right. And they've done it so right so far in the last few weeks, in my opinion. So I think LIV can kind of find a spot to coexist with the PGA Tour.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to, as far as the question goes, is LIV gaining speed? In my notes, I wrote down the answers. No, nothing's changed. But I think it's a little more complicated than that, when I really sit back and think about it, because it comes down to LIV figuring out its business model. Like we've seen the reporting so far that LIV, through its own, court filings, has said, we aren't really making money here. I think that's the problem that LIV has to solve. I think the product can work. It's just a matter of finding the eyes, finding the fans,
right.
And that's going to take time. Is LIV gaining speed? I don't think that's a question that can really be like answered week to week. I think that's something that we'll have to kind of sit back, like after this season, compare it to its first season and say, did LIV gain traction, gain fans, gain credibility from last year? And I think the answer will probably be yes.
Yes, I would agree.
So if they can keep doing that and, their backers until they start making money, we've seen some hints that they're tightening the purse strings a little bit for teams, and they're trying to create a little more self-sufficiency among the teams for, the revenue and how they operate through funding. All that stuff is good. But at the end of the day, they're playing the long game. They're playing the very long game. So as long as they've got investors who are still willing to keep feeding it, I think it'll work. And, long term, I agree with your take that they can find an audience. They can find something long term here.
If they keep going to countries like Australia, where the PGA Tour hasn't been, how can you say that some of these younger fans in Australia like the PGA Tour more, right? They got their main guy on Cam Smith on the LIV Tour. They have a tour that's actually come to their country recently and been successful in it. And I would venture to believe they'll go back after that setting. I just have a hard time thinking that, you have Australia, which isn't a small country, have all these younger fans that be PGA Tour fans. They're going to be LIV Golf fans, in my opinion. They see, like I said, Cameron Smith was there, one of their main guys that's a major champion, right? So I think it's going to be easier for those guys to follow. If they can kind of find those untapped markets like Australia, then I think they can carve their own business path. Yeah.
And sticking with the theme here, we've got a couple LIV topics to break down real quick. Is Bryson done? And the reason why I'm asking this is because he finished basically in a tie for 28th in Australia. Best finish this season is a T16 in Orlando. You've got a T23 and a T44 mixed in there. Of course, he missed the cut at the Masters. He's ranked 137th in the world and dropping like a lead balloon. So the question is, where does he sit in the overall golf landscape? And like some of the debate on social media that I've seen, is it over for him? Is the Bryson era come and gone?
I don't know if it's done for him, but he has made some body changes in the last year, it seems. We saw him at the Masters. He looked a little bit different. Mm-hmm. He's historically never played well at the Masters, especially when he called it a par 67. That didn't really help his odds. He's getting beat by guys like Bernhard Langer and Fred Couples, so that's really tough for him for the psyche's sake. But I don't think he's done, Josh. He certainly hasn't played well, and if I had to venture to bet, some of those LIV Golf backers are making it known that he needs to play better.
Yeah, it's interesting. But Gary, the argument there is going to be the argument that
he'll always still be Bryson, though. He's always going to have that fan base, right?
Yeah, I think the argument, I would say the clapback to, play better would be that he's still a very identifiable brand in golf, right? Like, so the long drive stuff, I think, actually stands out more from a career standpoint than any of his play as, a conventional professional golfer, right?
Right. He's a guy that hits it far, and he's got the irons that are all the same length, right? That's the way that's identical with Bryson. Where's the hat that's different than everybody else? So, right, like you hit the nail right on the head. He's very identifiable, and he always will be. I do think he's gone a bit too far with that to be competitive again in traditional golf. So I don't know that we'll ever see, think about what it took for Jordan Spieth to get back to a place where once he started to crater, it was a years long project, and Bryson doesn't really seem interested in worrying about that. He does actually still seem more interested and more concerned about the long drive stuff. He's always kind of been that way though too. So,
yeah, which
but I
cool.
wouldn't be surprised if we see
that's his brand. Like, that's cool. So, I think there's still value there in him. I don't think the LIV backers need to get too pissed off at him yet. Patrick Reed, here's my theory. I think Patrick Reed is the most underrated golfer in the world right now. He's got 4 top 5s in LIV in 2022. He's ranked 5th overall right now in LIV for this season. He's added 2 more top 5 finishes in the most recent LIV events, and he finished tie 4th at the Masters. Like, he is legitimately, I think, the most underrated golfer in golf, right?
Right. If they don't let him play in the Ryder Cup, which it doesn't look like they're going to let LIV players play in it, he's going to sorely be missed, right? Because he's a guy that is Captain America, right? He plays well in those team events every single year, whether it be the Ryder Cup or the President's Cup. So it's really going to take a hit in my mind if Patrick Reed can't play there, because he's playing some good golf, like you just mentioned, Josh, and he always plays well, whether he's not playing good or playing bad in those events. He brings his best game to those. So I think the Ryder Cup discussion is going to be a really interesting one to follow as we get farther and farther into this season, and see if they let guys like him or Cam Smith play. He'll be in the President's Cup, but some of those other players that are mainstays in that European Ryder Cup, see if they play, if Patrick Reed is there, if Brooks Koepka's there for the American team. It's going to be really interesting. I don't think they will be, but they will be missed if they're not.
Yeah, I think it sets up really well for a debate about world golf ranking and what it means and how it looks, especially, if we get a couple more majors under our belts where these guys are, mirroring their performances in the Masters. I think the world golf ranking argument for LIV not being included is essentially dead, right? Mm-hmm. So that's, to me, I don't know how you could make the argument right now that Patrick Reed, looking at his performance in the Masters and how consistently he's played in LIV, no matter what you think about those events, that he isn't one of the 10 or 15 best golfers in the world right now.
It's fair, yeah. We'll see how he plays at Oak Hill and Rochester here in the next few weeks. I'm intrigued to see if we get another LIV performance like we did in the Masters, but we'll have an up-close look at it in our backyard here in Rochester.
And to that end, let's talk about this event coming up this weekend. We've got the Mexico Open. I kind of feel like it's the last lull here before we get into another busy stretch like we had around the Masters. We've got elevated events, then we've got the PGA here at Oak Hill and Rochester. So what are you looking at as kind of the big storylines that stand out to you about the Mexico Open?
It's just wild when you look at this field, right? You have the Masters champion, #1 ranked in the world, reigning champion at this event, Jon Rahm, coming back to play in sort of a weaker field, right? Taking a look at the odds, Jon Rahm's plus 275. He's under 3-1 to win a golf tournament in 2023, which is pretty wild. You don't really see those low of numbers ever. Looking at the rest of the odds, Tony Finau is also playing, another good golfer. He's plus 800. But then you take a huge leap to Wyndham Clark. I'll say that again. Wyndham Clark is the third favorite in this event at plus 1,600. Former U.S. Open champion Gary Woodland, 22-1. And Canadian Patrick Rodgers, 28-1, rounds out your top 5 at the Mexico Open. And it's just wild that Jon Rahm's playing here. And that's what I want to ask you, Josh. Isn't it just so cool for Jon Rahm to come to this event? He said he was going to play earlier in the year, especially after he won last year. He wins the Masters, has 4 win events this year. He could easily say, I think I'm going to skip this one, especially because it's not an elevated event. I don't think anyone would really bat an eye, right, if he withdraws from this one and doesn't play in it. But we've heard Jon Rahm say he's the guy that likes to play these events if he makes a commitment. So what does it mean to you that Jon Rahm's going to play in this event and not back out of it?
I think it's good for golf, and it means that he doesn't mind, right? Like he's playing well, playing in an event like this. Think of it, he might be the defending champion, but look at the field. I mean, you can almost think of it as a tune-up. Remember, we used to hear, back in the Tiger era, we used to hear about, him playing tune-up events in these fields where he just shouldn't have been, back when golf was in a very different place in the 2000s. And this is kind of the same scenario. I think getting back to a theme we've discussed a couple times here, long-term, looking at next season and beyond, I do think the tour needs to kind of figure out with these non-elevated events. I don't think it's a great look for a Jon Rahm to be playing in an event like this when the field is so weak. This is a very weak field.
I think it's just because he's the defending champion, but yeah. But it still is really good for that event, though, because they can say that the Masters champion, defending champion, has one of the most incredible golfers on the planet is coming to our event.
Oh yeah, no, it's great, especially when
sells a lot of tickets.
When you're talking about the sponsors and everything like that. But when you're talking about the intent of these non-elevated events, especially after this year, when we really start to see the ups and downs, the trials and tribulations of non-elevated versus elevated. You've got a guy who's been cleaning up in elevated events. Right. Now he's coming to a non-elevated event where, we're going to talk about our picks to win. I don't know how anybody can look at this, will be leaderboard here and not say Jon Rahm will win by 1 billion strokes.
I'm taking Patrick Rodgers if that helps you at all.
Which is wild to me. It's wild to me that after what you just said about Jon Rahm, that you could pick anyone other than Jon Rahm. It's crazy.
It's so hard to win a golf tournament when you're at that low of odds. We've seen Jon Rahm as a guy that looks at the odds. We had that fun quote at the Masters and someone asked him if he feels more pressure than he's the favorite, and he said, "No, I'm not the favorite." So it's going to be interesting to see whether Jon Rahm can keep playing good golf and win this event. I really would not be surprised. But at 2,800, I just really like the idea of Patrick Rodgers. He's been playing well lately. He had a solo 5th at Valero, Texas, top 20 at the RBC Heritage. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jon Rahm wins, of course, but I'd like to see Patrick Rodgers up there towards the end of that Sunday and maybe take home the victory.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about, the last couple elevated events that I recall going through the odd sheets. I don't recall an elevated event where Tony Finau had better than plus 3,000 odds.
Right.
Recently. So that to me really says just how weak this field is, where, he's second by a margin to Rahm and he is your second overall. I mean, that is just, so, all right, we've got that out of the way. Long shot betting value. what are you looking at, or who are you looking at?
I'm looking at the young phenom, Ashke Bhatia.
Love it.
Hasn't played super well this season. The one time he did play well at the Puerto Rico Open, he was able to confirm status for the rest of the year for him on the PGA Tour. So that was pretty cool. Not in a great field. I think Ashke can kind of rise to the top. I like the number on him a lot, 90-1 this morning when I looked. So I think the young guy can play well. So we're looking forward for Ashke this weekend.
And I'm going with the old guy by comparison, Jimmy Walker, who, he looked good there a couple of weeks ago through Saturday, and then kind of, the wheels came off a little bit.
Was it the Heritage you played really well, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was just literally 2 weeks ago. But you know what? All that aside, I think, he's shown he can still play. Relatively weak field in the grand scheme of things. So this is the kind of event that if he won, I certainly wouldn't be surprised. And at those odds, plus 15,000, I think it's worth throwing a couple bucks on it just to see, right?
Yeah, I like it.
So outside of that, we don't really have anything else here on the script, but I'm curious, what's one thing you're going to be watching for this weekend as you sit down and watch some golf?
I think it's Jon Rahm, right? I mean, can he win another event, especially these low of odds? I know we've talked about it ad nauseum already, but I think he is going to be the guy we're looking at to see if he can kind of keep the momentum going that he's gained this season and keep playing well.
Agreed. And I think it forces a discussion if he wins. And if he wins by a couple strokes, if he wins by a little bit of a margin, I think it forces a discussion about these non-elevated events, definitely, who can or should be playing in them, no matter who won them in the past. But hey, that is going to do it for this week's Out of Bounds. We'll be back on Sunday after the Mexico Open. For the latest, check out outofboundsgolfpod.com. Follow Out of Bounds on TikTok, Instagram, and of course, subscribe here on YouTube. And remember, whether it's down the middle or out of bounds, keep on swinging.
You've been listening to Out of Bounds. If it's coverage, debate, or discussion of pro and local golf, we'll be talking about it. Be sure to visit the website at fingerlakes1.com. Find us on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter at OutOfBoundsFL1. See you next time on Out of Bounds.